Welcome and thank you for joining us today for Moving Beyond Remote Access. Discover the power of zero trust network access. My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be moderating today's event. Our featured speakers are Seamus McGillicuddy, Vice President of Research covering network management at Enterprise Management Associates, and Tim Roddy, Vice President of Marketing at Open Systems. Seamus has more than 16 years of experience in the IT industry as an industry analyst and journalist. His research focuses on all aspects of managing enterprise networks. Tim brings over 25 years of go-to-market strategy, marketing, and partner expertise in cybersecurity, software, cloud, and SaaS, including 15 years of executive and leadership positions at iBoss, Fidelis Cybersecurity, McAfee, and Secure Computing. And before I hand things over to today's featured speakers, I wanted the audience to know that Seamus and Tim will be concluding today's presentation by taking your questions. Feel free to log them anytime by using the Q&A functionality. Also, today's event is being recorded and you will receive a follow-up email from EMA with additional resources, so be sure to check that email out. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our first featured speaker, Seamus McGillicuddy. Seamus?
Thank you, Raleigh, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. And sorry we had a slight delay in getting started. So today's presentation from Tim and me is about moving beyond remote access and discovering the power of something called zero trust network access. Now, when we say moving beyond remote access, what we're talking about is moving past a legacy approach to providing secure connectivity, so-called secure connectivity, to people, especially people working from home or coffee shop, wherever, somewhere besides the corporate premises. Remote VPNs are at this point a legacy technology, and zero trust network access is a next generation solution that a lot of enterprises are starting to look at. So first thing we're going to talk about here is the factors that might drive you or your peers to migrate in that direction. The first thing I want to talk about is hybrid work. So 85% of IT organizations told us in our market research. So I survey thousands and thousands of IT professionals a year, and I talk to dozens on a quarterly basis about what they're doing with network infrastructure and operations in general. And so this presentation sort of draws on data and insight from that ongoing market research practice that I manage. One of the things that we're seeing is that at least 85% of IT organizations have seen a permanent increase in the number of people who work remotely from home, or so-called hybrid workers, which are defined as people who float between remote work and on-premises work. A lot of companies in the post-pandemic era have moved towards having people come in just once or twice a week for the purposes of cultural cohesion and collaboration and things like that. And so before the pandemic happened, the average enterprise told us that about 19% of their people worked remotely, and in the post-pandemic era they're telling us they expect it to be 50%. I'm seeing actually more recently, I'm analyzing some new research data right now that shows that it's actually going up a little bit towards 54%. But here's a quote from a network engineer at a Fortune 500 insurance company who sort of tells it like it is. After the pandemic, we expect about 70% of our people to go in the office only 2 or 3 days a week. Another 15% will never go back. He, like many people that we talked to, empowered that remote work during the pandemic by scaling up their VPNs as much as possible. It's difficult to use a VPN solution to support hybrid work because just scaling those VPN concentrators becomes expensive and difficult. Some people said they were able to do it pretty easily. Others said it was extremely painful. You start having performance issues because there's a lot of network overhead on those secure connections that the VPN establishes between individual users and corporate resources, and they're already relying on ISPs that may or may not be very good. So you're just introducing more overhead onto distressed connectivity already. And there's also a security risk because VPNs are often designed in such a way that it gives you open access to corporate resources without any sort of granularity into like controlling what they're accessing, and limited visibility into whether those credentials are being used properly. Like if someone steals VPN credentials, they can easily cause a lot of havoc. We've seen some major exfiltrations and ransomware attacks in recent years that were instigated by someone who had stolen VPN credentials, for instance. And also, when we ask NetOps people and end user support people, what are the root causes of home office user complaints when you got all these remote workers? What are they most often complaining about? Or what is the root cause of the issue that draws their complaints? You see, it's a pretty close tie between these three issues. These are the top three issues that IT operations reported to us: home Wi-Fi, VPN concentrator, and WAN edge device like a modem or a router. So you see that VPN concentrators are becoming a potential bottleneck and single point of failure in some instances if you don't have a high availability design in place. So that is a major issue that's driving people to think about a different approach to empowering remote work. And another thing that isn't on the slide that I think about is also like unifying security policy and access policy for those hybrid workers as they're floating from the home office to the on-premises network. Like a VPN concentrator is not going to have anything to, or VPN setup is going to have completely siloed policies from whatever you're doing in terms of access control on the on-premises network. So that's something else to think about. Another issue is multi-cloud networking. 88% of NetOps people tell me that their company is going to be multi-cloud by 2024, and 47% are going to have 3 or more providers. And when we ask them, what are the pain points that you have in dealing with multi-cloud networking? Number one is security risk. Only 12% told us that they have no difficulty in consistently managing network security policies and access policies across the multiple cloud providers that they're supporting today. And as they, whether those multiple clouds are siloed, where they're just, applications siloed within those clouds, or you're having a lot of cloud interconnectivity between like AWS, Azure, Google, like you've got applications talking to each other, you got people accessing applications. You need to be able to control how those applications talk to each other, how those users access applications. And a VPN is not going to contribute anything to the conversation, really. Here's a security operations manager at a $4 billion media company who told me that there is no one tool that can identify all of our cloud-based VPN clusters and draw a picture to show us our weaker management controls and where our weaker policies need to be adjusted. Like that person cannot really even understand whether they're secure in a multi-cloud environment, let alone implement security and access policy. What kinds of VPN challenges can you expect when you move into multi-cloud? Well, hub and spoke networks are absolutely history if they aren't already. Like the data center is no longer the center of your network. You can't like route everyone through your VPN concentrators in a data center, because those things are going to add latency, especially as you then hairpin the traffic to whatever clouds you're using, right? The concentrators become a choke point in a multi-cloud network. And VPN services from cloud providers are bandwidth limited. We see a lot of people that try to use the native networking services, networking and security services from their individual cloud providers and say, okay, I'm going to use AWS's VPN service, I'm going to use Azure's VPN service. Those services are pretty limited in the amount of throughput you can get from them. And also you're managing them all in a siloed way. Like you don't have a central management point for, the different VPN services you're using from all your cloud providers. There's just no coordination there. At the same time, we're seeing the mainstreaming of zero trust security as a concept, where people are really investing in this idea of least privilege access and challenging access and authenticating people repeatedly, tracking their behavior, things like that. 41% of network teams told me recently that zero trust security is shaping their overall network operations strategies. So infrastructure and operations on the networking side, zero trust is influencing it. 69% told us that they're engaged with zero trust. In other words, they've replaced or plan to replace their legacy remote access solutions with something more zero trust oriented. And the business benefits that they are expecting when they start embracing zero trust are broad and you see here, like the big one is they're expecting IT operations agility. They don't have these rigid controls in place that are slow to manage and change. They can react on the fly to changes in what's needed from like an access standpoint, a security standpoint. They've also got improved GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. So they're reducing their overall risk in terms of like how they're meeting industry standards and government regulations and overall risk of breach. They're also getting good at preventing breaches and containing breaches and reducing their overall attack surface so that breaches don't actually happen. And they're also getting better at dealing with and mitigating unauthorized access when they detect it. And then you're also seeing increased business agility, like not only is IT operations flexible, but they can also react. IT architecture overall is able to react to the changing needs of the business and innovate to solve new problems. And then finally, cloud enablement. Cloud enablement. We already talked about how multi-cloud is just invading digital enterprises on a global basis. These people think, a lot of them, more than nearly a quarter of them, think that embracing zero trust as a security model enables their migration to the cloud, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, whatever. So let's talk about how, what's ZTNA and how can you succeed with it? ZTNA being zero trust network access, obviously. Here on the left, you see the top 5 issues that people say they're struggling with when they're trying to embrace a zero trust initiative. They're struggling with budget. It can get expensive. They're investing in multiple products. They're spending a lot of time and resources on it. Project complexity, which is often intertwined with budget. It's just really hard to transform how you do networking and access control and so forth. They're also dealing with skills gaps. So they don't have people that know the concept or the individual technologies they need to adopt. They're also seeing conflicts between the NetOps and SecOps teams. That these teams have to come together on something like zero trust network access, obviously, and also and if they can figure that issue out, they can possibly solve the skill gaps issue if they can bring themselves together and force multiply. And then fragmented zero trust solutions, just too many solutions that they're using. You see on the right, silo conflicts in detail. 68% of enterprises report that zero trust prompts closer collaboration between NetOps and SecOps groups. So as they're having conflicts, they're also having to work closer together. There needs to, if you want to succeed with using something like a zero trust network access solution, you're going to have to think about all these challenges, but you also need to figure out a way to bring those two groups together to move in one direction. Maybe in the past, the network team owned and operated the remote VPN solution, and maybe the SecOps team gave them like information on what policies needed to be expressed through it. But I think with zero trust network access, it becomes a more collaborative environment where the two teams need to work together, not only to implement a solution, but also to own and maintain and operate it. You see this quote from an IT director at a Fortune 500 healthcare company. He sort of exemplifies that. He said, zero trust is going to be highly collaborative collaborative, and I see us having issues there. Security will come to us and say, we want to do X. Okay, great. What does that mean? We're not sure. And who is going to pay for it? Like, often security teams and network teams don't speak the same language. A security team will come and say, we need to do this, and the network team doesn't really know what they're talking about on a conceptual basis. I've seen it on things as simple as like, hey, a security team comes to the network team and says, I need to see all traffic associated with VLANs in the data center. And then and the NetOps team says, we have a lot of VLANs. If I show you all that traffic, you're never gonna be able to analyze it. Like, you need to give me specific VLANs to look at. That's the type of disconnect there is between SecOps and NetOps. So zero trust network access, what do you need to know about it? EMA research on the left, it tells you what kinds of expectations your peers have about zero trust solutions in general. And these can kind of tell you what you might look for in a ZTNA solution. The biggest one is they want a solution that will challenge users to re-authenticate based on policies and observed activity. So like, okay, you are here using this device. You can let's authenticate you based on this. But if you move from your home office to a coffee shop, we are going to challenge you again because we've detected that move, and we're going to challenge you again. Or hey, you're using applications you don't typically use. That's a little concerning. We're going to challenge you again, re-authenticate. And that plays into the fact that they want continuous monitoring of all network activity, not only of that user, but anything else that's happening on the network. They want multi-variable authentication policy design. So like, we need to not only, it's not just about your identity and your password, but also the device, the security status of that device, where you are, all kinds of things. And then 39% told us they want the ability to authenticate every device, user, and application connection. So every connection needs to be individually authenticated. And finally, granular segmentation, being able to sort of say, this is, you can access this, but not that. You can access this application, but not that application. You can pull this kind of data, but not that kind of data. Things like that. So knowing that, what people want, like, what is a zero trust network access solution? First off, it's quite often going to be a cloud-based remote access solution where points of presence are close to the users and applications to minimize things like latency that might be associated with having a single VPN concentrator in a data center that pulls users from all over the world and sends them out to different clouds. So it has to have control points and authentication engines possibly deployed in multiple regions to manage the network connectivity efficiently. Speaking of management, it has to have a centralized management of policy design and enforcement, like, so you can open it up and say, and make global changes to whatever policies they have in place, but also see how those policies are being enforced. It has to have adaptive multi-variable authentication, as we mentioned. It should have least privileged access through things like granular segmentation, so that you access what you need only and nothing more. And it has to continuously monitor and re-authenticate things through some kind of mechanism that says, okay, we can see what's happening, let's challenge them again, and so forth. That's my view. Tim, in a couple minutes, might have a more nuanced view of this, but we'll see from him. So we also asked NetOps pros, hey, would you tell us what are the platform requirements you have for a zero trust network access solution? So these are things that they're looking for and things that you might want to consider. Performance and scalability is number one. So using, which kind of harkens back to having like a cloud-based platform. Like when you when you have a solution that's delivered via the cloud, it can use the scalability of the cloud to deliver on that performance and scale. But it also, can deploy access gateways or whatever you want, however you want to describe them, as close to the network edge as possible to minimize latency and optimize performance. Number two, they want access, visibility, and analytics. So not just the ability to see what's happening, but also analytics capabilities that can interpret what's happening and say like, hey, we think this is indicative of that. Like maybe looking at threat information and applying it to what activity is observed on the network. It has to support a hybrid multi-cloud network. So as I mentioned, everyone's multi-cloud, moving towards multi-cloud, but it's also a hybrid multi-cloud. Most enterprises are maintaining data center assets to varying degrees and integrating them into a multi-cloud network. So that ZTNA solution needs to be able to manage network access across all of that. It also has to enforce user and endpoint compliance. It has to have deployment flexibility, in terms of like being able to deploy with an agent or maybe even agentless in some cases, and also has to maintain user experience and visibility into user experience. So those are the key requirements. One final thing for me, in terms of the future of Zero Trust Network Access, we're increasingly seeing Zero Trust Network Access as a service delivered via secure access service edge, or in some cases, secure service edge, which is a unified platform for software-defined wide area networking, secure service edges, which is a multi-function cloud-delivered security solution that can include things such as a secure web gateway, cloud application security brokers, and firewalls as a service. Quite often, like a single pass inspection of traffic, where all the different security functions analyze traffic as it's passing through a cloud-based point of presence and a secure access service edge SASE solution, and ensuring compliance with all security policies and allowing and blocking traffic. But at the same time, that secure service edge capability is inspecting and blocking traffic, you also have a Zero Trust Network Access service also in that same platform that is managing remote access or network access across your enterprise. And our research is showing that when people are looking at SASE solutions, the two things that they're most concerned about are having a robust cloud-based network security platform in those POPs, but also having a solution for Zero Trust Network Access or remote access. Some of them look for like so-called cloud-based VPN solutions in a SASE solution, but I think most people are thinking less in terms of VPN services in a SASE solution and more true Zero Trust Network Access. So that's what my research is showing. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tim for his presentation, then I'll be back later to join him for Q&A. Tim? Are you muted?
Thanks, Seamus. Appreciate that great presentation, and hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to extend upon what Seamus just talked about and talk in particular about Zero Trust Network Access. That is something that we offer here at Open Systems. It's part of our SASE solution. So the last slide that Seamus talked about the fact that folks are now moving to SASE solutions for a true cloud-delivered network security, web security experience, as well as ZTNA and SD-WAN. And that's what we do. And what makes us different from everybody else is we only offer it as a managed service run by us, not by run by a third-party MSSP or by a telco, but by our engineers and people on a 24/7 basis. The goal at the end of the day for everybody looking into moving to this modern architecture is to connect any user to any application, no matter where that user is located, and do it securely. So next slide, please. So what we're showing here kind of summarizes the problem that everyone has, and it was kind of alluded to a little bit by Seamus here, but the challenges that we have from how the world's changed from a business standpoint, and most businesses have gone off and started moving or spinning up new applications, putting custom apps in public clouds, as you see here on the left side. as well as allowing their users to go to the internet as part of their job, while at the same time still having an on-premise environment where they still have applications and data and systems and servers sitting behind their firewalls there. Even if they have a strategy to move to the cloud, it doesn't happen overnight. They may get there 100%. Most organizations, though, never will. So they have data now located behind the firewall like they traditionally have, and increasingly out in the cloud. For example, in the middle there under SaaS apps, you see, ServiceNow and Atlassian and Salesforce. What organization doesn't use Salesforce? It seems like running your customer relationship management system on your own hardware in your own data center has passed us by. So now you've got this valuable data out there. You need to control access to it properly. Routing everyone through a VPN if they're out of the office, and then back out to Salesforce and other applications just doesn't make sense. It adds latency. It adds all the issues that you heard in the first part of the presentation. And on top of that, we saw all the data. We've got users that, because of COVID, everybody seemed to be working remotely. We bought a lot of VPNs. Now they're going back to the office. There's a lot of news articles now about organizations wanting people back in 3 days a week or so. That means that those remote users become hybrid users. They're going to be spending maybe 60% of the time in the office and 40% working somewhere else. And so we have to adapt our networks to handle that. So on the right-hand side of the screen, I show you how we do it with a SASE solution, and focus in on the security service edge part of it, because the remote users will connect to all those applications as well as the general internet via that cloud solution, which has a number of options to it. It has secure web gateway, it has firewall as a service, it has CASB, but most importantly for the purposes of this conversation, it has ZTNA, Zero Trust Network Access. And those are POPs in the cloud that front going to those cloud apps like a Salesforce or a ServiceNow. It has the ability for you to deploy a version of that software, identical version of that software, in front of your applications in those public clouds. And it was mentioned that everyone's in hybrid public clouds. So most organizations, some people have put some of their applications in Amazon, some of them have put it in Microsoft Azure, yet others have put it in Google or some combination thereof. So you have to look for a capability to put those ZTNA POPs in front of those applications in those clouds to secure them, have a cloud POP from the provider to get to all of the other apps in the cloud. But you still have to be able, when you're a remote user, to get to those apps and data that are still behind the firewall. So inside that firewall, you want to be running a ZTNA POP there as well. So you're looking for a solution that is not only cloud-based, but that cloud software, that identical software that runs in a container, can be run in your organization as well as in a public cloud. And that's what we do here at Open Systems. Next slide, please. So the SSE part of it makes it a lot easier for the organization. If you go ahead and build this out, Seamus, it'll start to show some lines. But makes us the one and only entry point for your users. So if think about what they're doing in their job, you can keep building. You may need to go to the general internet. Maybe you got to check LinkedIn. You're in a meeting with somebody, a third party, you want to know about them, right? So you have a legitimate reason to go to the internet. That's where the secure web gateway comes in. You want to control access to not only corporate applications and systems, but you also want to have zero trust access to legitimate cloud apps that you're running out there, or ones that you have running in your public cloud. And as I mentioned earlier, you have to be able to deploy in front of all of those to provide zero trust access. The beauty of this, there's no VPN. There's no VPN client to go down. There's no latency introduced from any of this. So we can therefore provide access to data in the on-premise environment as well as in the cloud for those remote users. And when that remote user becomes an on-site user down on the bottom right, they have access to everything internally, obviously, and they go out to the cloud back through that hub to make sure they're getting to those applications securely. And the beauty of this, you look at one of the last two slides that was presented, was paying attention to what devices and where people are located. So the beauty of this is there's an agent that redirects the user at all times to make sure they're going through the policy enforcement point in order to get to the application. So that if the user takes their credentials and is at a friend's house and wants to borrow their computer to go check something, a corporate asset, they're not going to get in because that laptop, that is not going to be routed through the policy enforcement point, even though they have the correct credentials. The applications are set up to only accept traffic from those policy enforcement points. That shrinks the attack surface, shrinks the ability to get authorization there. So that eliminates the problem of the impossible traveler, who's actually a malicious attacker who has stolen credentials and is trying to get in from somewhere in Eastern Europe, for example, and you happen to have all US employees and they never go to Eastern Europe. That's the impossible traveler. It's not possible that that person who was logging in 5 minutes ago from Des Moines is now logging in from Kyiv. It's just not the case. So that's where you start to be able to really put into place, invisible to the end user, additional controls. Because I talked about the fact that you need to have these POPs that are cloud-based, need to be able to deploy that software in the public clouds as needed to protect those applications and also deploy them on premise. That means you want to have the ability to set policy once. So you want central policy set once and enforced for all use cases, and we provide that as well. This results in a very consistent user experience that's seamless for those remote users. If you're familiar with VPNs, people complain the VPN went down, I can't get it to restart, I can't get my job done. That all goes away with a properly deployed Zero Trust Network Access solution. Next slide, please. I alluded to this in what I was talking about here, but in terms of deployment capabilities, when you deploy on premises, you're going to be putting on a box. It might be an appliance. It might just be a virtual appliance running on some hardware, but at the end of the day, it's hardware in your presence that's there to sit in front of and provide Zero Trust access to those applications in your data center. But you also need to be able to put them virtually out in your cloud tenants to secure those apps, as I mentioned, that are in Google, in AWS, and at Microsoft's Azure. And finally, we have POPs situated across the globe that will sit in front of any cloud application that you want to go to so that we can provide that access. And it's all the same code, all running the same version, all set with a policy that's set once by us and managed by us when we interact with you for any changes that are needed, and then provide Zero Trust access to any of them. So we're able to give you all the deployment options you could ever need, meeting all your use cases, and therefore evolve with you as you move on your digital transformation journey. 3 years from now, you may not need things in your data center anymore, or you may need very little, because that can just be de-emphasized and decommissioned, and everything will be out in the cloud. So we can move with you on your journey as you move forward. Next slide. Benefits of all this. It's simple. It's standardized. Same software everywhere. We meet all those flexible deployment options that I just laid out. And because it's a managed service, there's big total cost of ownership reduction here. You don't need to hire a lot of extra people. We become an extension of your IT and security staff running this thing, because it is truly a managed service run by experts, and we're monitoring it 24/7. A lot of organizations have not true on-call monitoring going on. They may have to wake somebody up. Our people are actually at keyboards 24/7 across the globe managing all of this. As a result of the fact we use the same software everywhere, we have one security policy enforced at all points. That ends up with your users and your IT group having a very consistent experience, very simple and very happy experience. And that means that we truly make secure connectivity very simple. Next slide. So just to show how ours all fits together, if you could kind of build out, there's a couple arrows coming in here. On the left, we're talking about any user, any device at any location. So it's a global deployed enforcement points. As I mentioned, any user can be configured for it. They'll be routed through the system on any device that's authorized. If they're using an unauthorized device, they're not going to get through. And that means we're validating the endpoint there to reduce your risks. We can enforce where they connect based on their location, time of day, any other context that you want. And we integrate with all the major identity providers, the Oktas, the Pings, ForgeRock, et cetera. Because if you're talking to vendors about ZTNA, beware of anybody that says, oh, buy our product and you'll be in Zero Trust. No, that's not true. Zero Trust is a journey. It's going to take a long time to do. It's something you have to pursue over time. It means making sure you got the right identity provider. It means making sure you have the right SASE provider like us. It means figuring out what you're doing with your SD-WAN capabilities, everything. and everybody has to work together. So those integrations are very important. And then on the right-hand side, we will filter the traffic through our infrastructure to control access to either data and applications that are in your hardware and data center, and you see a whole bunch of them on the far right listed there. It can be servers or files or legacy applications, what have you. But more importantly, we can control access and shrink the attack surface to any application you've got running in any of the public IaaS services, Azure, AWS, and Google, or basically any cloud business application out there. And we just happen to pick 3 here, like ServiceNow, Salesforce, and Atlassian, that are commonly deployed. So at the end of the day, as shown at the bottom, any user on any device in any location can connect to any corporate application located anywhere, whatever cloud it's at your own data center, and do it with context-based access control, continually validating that they're patched properly, that they're on a device they're supposed to be on, etc. Next slide. And we'll have a little quick commercial about us for those not as familiar with us. Open Systems. Our customers average tenure with us, and they're always adding new ones, but it's about 7.5, 8 years. It's a long time. That's a lot of renewals. That happens because people are happy. And we do Net Promoter Score tracking on a monthly basis, and our average score last iteration was 63. We vary between 60 and 70 every month. That is extraordinarily high. That's up there where Apple Computer and people like that are. And as a result, we have a very high enterprise retention rate, as you see there. Lots of customers across the globe. We have end users in almost every country in the world because we have a lot of nonprofits that are customers, and they love the fact that we can connect them to their users. So we're used to connecting people from literally anywhere into a network, into data. And we've been at it for about 30 years now, constantly innovating to improve our customer service. Next slide. As a follow-on before we get into Q&A, which Riley's going to coordinate here for us, but I'd like to encourage you to download our quick guide to ZTNA. There's a URL there, or you can point your phone at the QR code and it'll bring it up on the page as well to pull that down. So I think next slide is for Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Tim and Seamus, for that information. Let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Let's start with you, Seamus. Regarding remote users, I solved my scale and performance issues. Why should I get rid of my VPN if it's doing the job?
Okay. I touched on this a little bit, but VPN generally gives you access to internal network resources without granular controls, and you're introducing security risk by not limiting the privileges of authenticated individuals. If you're, whether you're doing zero trust or not, like, you don't want a user to access data that they have no business touching. Also, there are no mechanisms in place to challenge your users who might violate a policy while connected via a VPN. So let's talk about, like, VPN credential is compromised, bad actors logging in, wreaking havoc. A ZTNA solution is going to granularly apply policies. And Tim touched on this as well. It's like, is this the device this user is authorized to use with these credentials? Is he coming from the right geography? Is his behavior different? Like, you can't do that with VPN. So even if you scaled it out properly, you're still not really securing your business. So that's one argument I would make.
Thanks for those insights, Seamus. Tim, jumping over to you. How does ZTNA enhance security posture and protect against evolving cyber threats?
Well, really building on the answer that Seamus just talked about, including this presentation here, you're moving away from focusing on protecting the network, which is the traditional architecture, and then VPNs were created to get you to the network remotely, right? Then you're relying on whatever is sitting there behind the network. If data is not sitting in the network anymore, and it's out in the cloud in Salesforce, I mean, you got very valuable customer information there. You got your accounting system out there. You got travel. You got all kinds of things out there, as well as applications running in the public clouds. you need to move the security over there. So you want to not only improve the performance by getting rid of the backhauling and everything that you get from a VPN and the complaints from customer or users when they get disconnected, but you want to run your filters, run your security bidirectionally as they go in and out of those applications. So you want to move security as close to in front of the data as is humanly possible, and that's what these point of policy enforcement points accomplish. And so that, as well as the fact that the whole idea is to shrink the ability to get to these applications, because if you've got a VPN, you've gotten access to a network, you can run wild within the network. And that's what attackers are used to doing. You always hear about when we have compromises that, that they've been in a company for 6 months or a year. They got in there, they're very stealthy, they lay low, and they map everything out. If you've got the data moved to a whole bunch of different places, you've disseminated it out there, but you still got to have the policy enforcement points in front of every single one and very strictly control who can get into it. And all those things combined result in enhanced security posture.
Thanks, Tim. Can you also discuss the key considerations and best practices for implementing ZTNA in a hybrid cloud environment?
Sure. The number one really doesn't have anything to do with what solution you decide to use, which is, do you know what you really have? It's amazing the number of applications, cloud apps in particular, or if you've got a development team, they've created some development apps and stuck them up in an Azure or an Amazon. Do you really have a good inventory of that? And most surveys of this, and maybe Seamus can talk about it some more as well from their research, most organizations really don't know. It's known as I think stealth IT is what some people call it, that they don't go talk to IT and go through the process and say, oh, I want to try this app out. Somebody in marketing will say, oh, I want to try some new tool out or something like that. Next thing you know, they got 20 people using it and there's data out there. So in order to implement ZTNA, you need to know what you're trying to protect, and you know where your data is and who has access to it. And that's an issue and an effort that has to be done, mapping out before you can begin to properly lock things down. And is your status quo right now, which is why I got legacy networking and all this stuff's running around out there and I don't know about it, means it's not secure at all. Seamus, do you have additional comments?
Well, I will say that, yeah, when we interact with the industry about, I sometimes call it shadow cloud or shadow IT. The infrastructure teams often have are actually aware of services like applications deployed in the cloud that they had no involvement in whatsoever. And then at a certain point, the people that deployed those services come to them and say, we need help securing this. And we need help with architecting better resiliency and performance on an infrastructure side. We have discovered that we're out of compliance with PCI DSS or HIPAA or whatever, and maybe you could help us with that. So, and then network access becomes a critical part of that equation, because they're like, well, you have no controls in place over what data is accessed. You need to put together something like a zero trust model to become compliant with these various regulatory controls that you have failed to address. And so that's something we see quite often.
Thank you, Seamus. Let's stay with you for the next question. The remote access offered by my cloud providers are good enough for my cloud ops team. How can I make the business case to them for investing in ZTNA?
I mentioned earlier that most native remote access solutions from cloud providers are bandwidth constrained, but there's also the complexity issue. If you're using 3 cloud providers, do you want to maintain 3 different policy frameworks? Like, you're going to experience drift in how access policies are enforced across those clouds, because each cloud provider not only has a siloed management environment, they also vary in how they define things, like, policy frameworks, policy engines, whatever. It's better to have one framework that works across those providers. So you don't want to have siloed access controls for each cloud. Like, if you're multi-cloud, you need something that works across them. Not just, from an access control standpoint, but everything, like routing, firewalling. Like I think when we specifically surveyed hundreds of enterprises earlier this year on the networking side, like networking people who were working in a multi-cloud enterprise, like at least 2 cloud providers, and we asked them, like, do you find it easier or difficult to manage this consistently or that consistently? And across the board, like all of them are struggling to consistently manage all aspects of networking and security because they're using siloed tools in each cloud provider. It's not something that is long-term viable. So that's the biggest argument I have.
Thanks, Seamus. Let's take one more question from each you and Tim. So I'll stay with you, Seamus, for one more question. I'd like to unify access policy across on-prem and remote work. Can I do that with ZTNA?
I think you saw from Tim's presentation that Open Systems supports that to some degree. It does vary from vendor to vendor. Like, but yes, this is something that a lot of your peers want and need, and a lot of them have siloed access across remote work and on-prem, and they try to have like a third-party automation tool that sort of helps them with policy, like consistent policy across them, or they might try to integrate the 2 access controls in some way, which is asking for trouble. But yeah, many ZTNA providers offer like the ability to impose access controls to some degree in an on-prem environment, and that allows your users to authenticate and access resources via the same agent or wherever they're working. And this might actually be a good way of vetting a vendor. If a zero trust network access vendor tells you that they don't have anything to say about how your on-premise users are accessing resources, chances are they might be like a legacy VPN vendor masquerading as a zero trust network access provider, which we see quite a bit out there. So yeah, that's my answer.
Great, thank you. And Tim, let's wrap up with you. How does ZTNA enable micro-segmentation and reduce the attack surface within a network?
No, great question. Well, first of all, if people are familiar with the NIST directives, I think it's 805-207 or 209, something like that, from the U.S. federal government, they talk about shrinking the attack surface by requiring access to an application or data through a policy enforcement point. And ZTNA is that policy enforcement point. You can't get to the data to the application unless you go through it. And that means that if someone steals my login information, but not getting redirected to that policy enforcement point, which is an IP address, they're not going to get through because the applications are typically configured. You go in and you IP restrict access to it so that even with something like a Salesforce, you're only getting in through a small list of IP addresses. You just can't come in from the general internet. So if you're on an IP coming from a local provider in Romania or something, you're not going to get in because we said that you have to come in through a certain policy enforcement point range that's provided by the ZTNA provider, in this case us. So you're dramatically micro-segmenting by doing that. The fact that the data is in 9 different clouds and 6 different cloud providers means it's no longer behind a firewall where you do the traditional segmentation. So you're getting to the segmentation through a different paradigm, a different approach.
Thank you for those insights. And I wanted to thank our audience for taking time out of your schedule to join us today. As I mentioned, you will be receiving a follow-up email from EMA with resources from today's webinar. So be sure to check that email out. And I hope we'll see you at a future EMA research webinar. Thank you again for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.